line to the Sphinx is again one of these equinox connections, but trying to stick with the Great Pyramid and have a look. And so we see now the transparent, so we can see now the internal shafts and chambers, at least the ones that are known about. There's a lot more to this, and again, this would be a long topic to go into, but I have like labelled the King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery. I'm using the standard names, but and also we'll see these four slender shafts leading off. So if the eight-sided pyramid was an internal collapse at 90 degrees from each other and perfectly aligned, again, that's just so, it's embarrassingly bad to say that it was because of the structure collapsed or partially collapsed in on itself. It's just wrong, so false. But as I mentioned earlier, I showed there are shafts inside, one heading north, one heading south on the inside of the King's Chamber, and the same again on the Queen's Chamber. These shafts are aligned to key points in the, or were, Badawi and Trimboli have shown how these were aligned to, well, the North Star as it was in antiquity, but also to the Belt of Orion and to Sirius. Once again, these are navigation points, and as I mentioned a bit earlier, even the location of the pyramid is a very important point in regards to navigation, considering the trade winds are swapping direction from east to west, and also that trade items such as cocaine and even a tobacco beetle have been found in Egyptian mummies. Next we need to have a look again at the alignments from these shafts, which point off to the southern alignments, which point off to Alnitak in Orion's belt, but especially to Sirius in Canis Major. Now, Sirius for ancient Greeks, Romans, Polynesians, so many other people, was a very, very important navigation tool, but also a calendar item. For instance, the flooding of the Nile was heralded by the arrival of Sirius. So, and Sirius is also considered, well, the star of Isis, and even the doubters have to admit the importance of Sirius, since the hieroglyph and so much else are especially connected to the Dendera zodiac. So the pyramid was built, these alignments were made, and they have been preserved because of the quality of the building of the pyramid. But now let's have a look at the King's Chamber. As I mentioned earlier, it's much like the pyramid itself, the external, the larger pyramid. The alignments and the measurements and so much else contain a spectacular level of sophistication and the encoding of very, very important mathematical knowledge, including Pythagorean theorem and proportions of triangles relating back to the golden section. Again, this was red granite, and this was brought from far away, but here we see this 3-2 triangle, square root of 5. Straight away you've got the golden section, but the 3-4-5 Pythagorean triangle. The floor of actually two floors to the Grand Gallery. You have the floor, but you also have a channel running around the outside, which gives it the extra depth. Multiple levels, multiple meanings. Richard Heath has spoken about the sacred Jewish cubit. Now, I've been including this because I think it's important because of the numbers involved. Now, the origin of it, I couldn't confirm it, so I'm not locking that in, but I am including it. But sticking just with the royal cubits and the meter ratio, so you have the perimeter of the King's Chamber encodes pi in meters, pi times 10 meters. The maximum visible, so if you're standing with your back towards the wall, that's the most you're going to see, and that's going to bring you to phi squared meters. So once again, this 6/5 ratio, which from the sacred Jewish cubit to the Egyptian royal cubit is 6/5, pi and phi. The sarcophagus itself, the external volume versus the internal volume, connects us to the Delium problem, which again was in official history not solved until much later. However, considering it's already got Pythagorean theorem and these other, lovely geometric measurements in there, that the sarcophagus was accidentally brought us to doubling the cube problem. It cannot be ignored or simply dismissed. Again, the alignment of it, the precision of the alignment of the king's chamber, but of the pyramid itself, the measures and the other information encoded inside, it just keeps building up and up. Now, high up in the top there, the pinnacle, now there is some graffiti which is basically in Campbell's chamber, which is used to date the pyramid and to give it over to Khufu. Again, very, very weak, and there's a whole scandal regarding that, and again Zahi Hawass and the way he behaves, and almost had guides put in prison for damage that he actually done. He blamed it on guides and these other researchers, and only when the photographic evidence was brought forth did he have to, were the people saved from going to jail for undeserved reasons. Again, this character, Zahi Hawass, if you just do a Google search of Zahi Hawass and Graham Hancock debate and see how he behaves towards Göbekli Tepe, and you will see straight through this guy. He is a gatekeeper or a very nasty character at the best. But I digress. Let's move away from the individual characters and focus on the pyramid itself. And for instance, the alignments to Orion's belt and Sirius. Sirius being the most important for the moment, because the Greeks and Romans used it as a calendar event, but so did the ancient Egyptians, which has a connection back to Abu Simbel and the cycles of flooding on the Nile. But now let's look at this diagram. By using the J.H. Cole survey, the supposed imperfections of the measurements on each side. So most researchers will tend to focus on the ideal measures, 440 by 280 cubits, but each side of a pyramid has a slight variation, and this imperfection is actually a excellent example of the perfection of the pyramid's construction, because the slight variations encode a series of knowledge, and it goes back to looking at the pyramid as a 3D object, not as a 2D object, and the number being 86,400. So virtually all the researchers will focus on this number, 43,200. I believe I've more than shown proof that this is not incorrect, but very inelegant, because it requires looking at the pyramid, dividing and timesing by 2. It gets all messy. But the number pi. So let's begin. If you stand at the southeast corner, the proportion of the pyramid is as close to pi as you're going to get. Now, because of the slight variations or the margin of error within the survey, this margin of error will bring us to perfect proportions of pi, looking at it from the southeast corner, and this is what I believe to be the greater code of the pyramid. Each corner represents a different level of knowledge, and so as you move around the pyramid, a 3D object, you need to look at it not just as a 2D plan, as a 3D plan. So what do I mean by that? As we move around to the southwest corner, the proportions are now pi times 100 meters, with again within a sliver of and within the margin of error of any survey regarding the pyramid. But once again, we have pi times 100 in meters. So the perfect proportion of pi is seen from the southeast corner. The perfect measurements appear in the southwest corner. Each corner has a new level of understanding now. So again, we look at it as a 3D object, but we'll see again, but the same. So pi times 10. So we had pi times 100 meters, and here we have pi times 10 meters appearing using the eastern face sliced down the middle. So this system, we'll go through it more and more, and it's going to appear, the importance of it's going to appear very strongly over and over again. Now, even the 115 meters is of very important piece of information, but we'll sticking to pi for the moment. So as above, so below. As inside is outside. Whatever is on the outside of a pyramid will be repeated on the inside of a pyramid. And another example of that is that the perimeter of the king's chamber is also pi times 10 meters. The connection between the second, the cubit, and the meter, and 86,400, not 43,200, brings all these things into wonderful harmony. Another very important point regarding pi as a proportion is the grand gallery. Now, again, most researchers will try and will use a rounded off measure of 153 feet. I would love it to be 153 feet, but the surveys again are showing that it's a sliver over 153 feet, making it in proportion to the height of the pyramid. So pi times the length of the grand gallery, 153.15. Let's just round it off a little bit. But the exact, let's stick with the exact measure also. But so again, we see a pi proportion. We also have pi represented in meters. Pi times 10 meters, pi times 100 meters, and most interestingly, pi times 1,000 meters. Now, I used Google Maps to calculate this distance. So the Great Pyramid is not exactly on the 30th degree or 108,000 seconds, as in the 108,000 seconds, 30 degrees of the pendulum clock, or pi over 6 radian. It is short of that distance. And the distance it is short, as least as best I could gather from using the measuring tool on Google Maps, is it's pi times 1,000 meters. Pi times 10 meters, pi times 100 meters, pi times 1,000 meters. The Egyptian royal cubit, again connecting to the meter, so, or pi over 6 meters, and the circumference of a circle with a meter diameter. A 2-meter circle gives us the 1 second pendulum clock. All of these things intricately connected, beautifully connected. It simply cannot be coincidence. And for people like Zoe Hawass to mock people and call them pyramidions really exposes his not only his character, but basically his level of understanding. Now, he might be very skilled in names and reading hieroglyphs, etc., but the maths and the metrology of the pyramid is the true language, and we need to look at that. So now we've gone through pi. Now let's look at the golden ratio, the divine proportion, phi. As on the eastern face, we saw a similar thing happening in regards to pi. Now we see the same thing happening as where that was in meters. Now we see phi appearing as a perfect proportion using the eastern face. And again, so as is the nature of pi, phi being such a beautiful number, the inverse, so pi minus 1 equals 1 divided by, phi minus 1 equals 1 divided by phi. This is one of the beautiful things about this number. Phi plus 1 equals phi squared. That's important because if we stand at the southeast corner and we include the visible base plus the invisible height, the total height, because the pyramid goes underground. So now we have, as we had the perfect proportions of pi from the southeast corner using the maximum visible base and the maximum visible height, the visible base divided by the invisible height gives us phi squared proportions. What's more, again, the surface area of the pyramid itself will give us this divine proportion. Over and over, as with what happened with pi, will happen also with phi, the divine proportion, the golden mean. So many names for it, but whether it's in the metrology or whether the proportions of a building, it happens again. So the western face gives us phi squared, or phi plus 1 in meters times 100. Again, so again, as with pi, as with phi, meters, proportions, 10 and 100, it happens over and over. As above, so below. As in regards to the pyramid, as is what's on the outside is what's on the inside. The same hermetic code philosophy comes through. For instance, the maximum visible edge length or perimeter of the grand gallery. So you stand at the shortest corner, if you're back towards the wall, you can only see 3 walls at one time. And those 3 walls, again, will bring us to phi plus 1, or phi squared, times 10 meters. Meters, proportions, over and over, phi and pi. Now, so as we move around to the northern face, the proportions that appear from here will give us phi squared. It simply is amazing. Now, again, the establishment will ignore these things. Firstly, they'll mock you, and then they'll ignore you, and that's what's happening with the establishment. But these are things that can be measured. These are things that have been measured, unlike so much of the fluff where they find a scrap of a hieroglyph and say, oh, therefore it's this and we know it for sure. It's anyway. Also, the angles of the pyramid will give us the golden mean, the divine proportion. And again, using trigonometry, using a type of maths which apparently they didn't have access to, yet coincidentally they were able to encode all these other proportions, all this other metrology, all these other alignments, and yet coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. It boggles the mind that so-called professionals and people who spend years and years studying this, and who have access to the site and have access to all sorts of resources, and yet they ignore this or snicker when it's even brought up. But again, we just using the math, using the proportion, especially proportions connected to, as I showed with astronomy and so much else. Now, this is a snippet of what's happening, and you just have to look. Now, how can this is just phi. Now, we also have pi, and we also had the astronomy, and we also had the 273, which I began with, and we'll review again in a second. It's simply not sustainable for the orthodoxy to be allowed to get away with what they've what they've been doing, or alternatively what they've not been doing. Either they're concealing it, or they need to get their ass in gear and do some proper examination. I showed this diagram I made earlier, and I want to explain this theory more, and about how the supposed imperfections on each side of a pyramid are actually a series of beautiful perfections which will encode so much knowledge and explain away some of the questions regarding the slight variations from true pi and phi in regards especially to meters. But all this has to do with the Great Pyramid having 8 sides, so these things will all connect as we'll go through them. So let's begin as we move around the pyramid. Now, the eastern section will give us perfect proportions of phi, again within a really sliver of a margin of error. So you see again, because of a surveying, because of the casing stones are missing, there's a slight variation. But as we move to the southeast visible corner, we will see pi appearing as in pi times 10 meters. The southeast corner, the visible base versus the visible height, will give us pi proportions. On that same corner, we're also going to get phi squared proportions, phi plus 1, the beauty of this, and again, the visible base including the invisible height, the total height. As we move to the southern face, we get the ideal proportions, and this is what most researchers focus on, and that's one of the problems, that it's not true pi or phi. But so to the southwest corner is about measurement scales in this beautiful connection, pi times 100 meters. The same thing will appear again, phi squared times 100 meters, as we move to this western side. So we have phi and pi meters, and again it's about perspectives on a 3-dimensional object, not a 2-dimensional plan. It's a 3-dimensional object. And also on the western side, we will get these proportions where it's the square in the circle inside the square, or 2.73, but also the proportions of Earth and Moon will appear on the western side. So we've gone through Phi, Pi in ratio, but also in meters. Now also on the west, so we go to the northwest corner, we get the proportion of Pi over 6, which is also the Egyptian royal cubit in meters. The northern face will also give us Phi squared proportions. So again, as we move around, we've moved through proportions to measurement, and now on to some other key proportions. And for instance, the standing at the northeast corner, we'll get these wonderful geometries happening again. So each corner, each side has a different tale to tell. And for instance, again, sticking with the northeast corner, the maximum visible base will describe the rotational speed of the Earth per second, which we can take even further. Since it's here on the northeastern corner that the scaling of the pyramid to the size of the Earth really appears. Now we have to include the sockets, which were around the corner, as well as the socle, the paving stones on which it stands. But the maximum visible base, it's a 3D object. We stand at the corner, we can see two sides, not only to describe the rotational speed of the Earth per second. And remember the 1 meter pendulum clock connecting to the Egyptian royal cubit and Pi over 6? Well, that same knowledge will extend. So if we multiply that maximum visible base by 86,400, we get the circumference of the Earth. This is much more elegant than the traditional way, which is to use 43,200 to get the half measures. Here we get the full scope of what's going on and the knowledge that's being passed on. And that extends even further because the height of the pyramid, including the socle, the paving stones on which it stands, multiply them by that same factor which so much connects us to the meter, to the pendulum clock and all the other connections, we get the polar diameter of the Earth. And this is a huge importance because the Earth is not a perfect sphere. It bulges at the center and it's slightly flattened at the top, and understanding that is key to geodesic measurement systems, Earth-based measure systems, which the meter was originally used as derived from the second and also from the polar circumference of the Earth. And so many of these ancient measures have so many connections to geodesic measure, so Earth-based measure, geometry, Earth measure. This is the core of the Hermetic code, about bringing measurement systems in tune with the natural world, not just on a microscopic scale, but on a macro scale. As above, so below. It's not just a motto, it's a way of thinking, and it's a way of understanding the world. And this, I believe, is how we are able to properly read the pyramid, in that it's not a two-dimensional object, but a three-dimensional object. And from the 1, the 2, and the third dimension, we get these properties which not only relate to the 1 second pendulum, the royal cubit, and the meter, but also tell a story. So each part, one part represents metrology, one part ratio, one part geometric ratios, one part Earth ratios, Earth and Moon ratios, and even the angles of the pyramid have so much information that this particular angle was chosen short in a building that was so perfect, surely is no coincidence. And again, has what's on the inside is what's on the outside. The Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber have the same thing, but again, getting back to the golden ratio, the angles across trigonometry bring us these beautiful proportions once more. The King's Chamber contains as well so much information, like Pythagorean triplets, Pi and Phi, and perfect alignments, and so much else. The Pi over 6 being relating to the cubit, to the position, to the 1 second pendulum, which we get the proportions. The north, the different corners, again, 2 and 3 dimensional geometry appearing, and it's that again, and also 1 cubit is Pi over 6 meters, but we get the same ratio of Pi times 100, Pi times 10. Also, I mentioned earlier, Pi times 1,000. inside and outside from the viewing it as a three-dimensional from the corner. And as we went through earlier, this
Come here. Come here, Penny. Penny, come here. Come here. Penny, come here. Come here. Come here, Penny. Come here, Penny.